It was 3:15 in the morning on March 13th, 1964, in a quiet residential neighborhood in Queens, New York. A 28-year-old woman named Kitty Genovese was walking home from work. She managed a bar. The shift had run late. The street was empty, the air was cold, and she was 2 minutes from her front door when a man named Winston Moseley stepped out of the dark and stabbed her. She screamed. She fell. She called out for help. A light turned on in one of the apartment windows above her. A man opened his window and shouted down into the street. Moseley ran. Kitty pulled herself up and started moving toward her building. Then the light went off, the window closed, and Moseley came back. He found her in the hallway of a neighboring building and stabbed her again. She screamed again. More lights, more windows. He ran again, and came back a third time. He found her in a doorway. He stabbed her until she was dead. The whole attack lasted approximately 35 minutes.
The New York Times ran the story 2 weeks later with a headline that became one of the most discussed sentences in the history of American journalism. 37 who saw murder didn't call the police. The number later became 38. The story described dozens of neighbors who had watched from their windows, heard the screaming, and done nothing. Not one of them called the police until it was over. One man reportedly told investigators he had not wanted to get involved. Another said he called a friend first to ask what he should do. The country was stunned. Editorials were written, sermons were delivered. Psychologists, sociologists, and ordinary people across America asked the same question. What is wrong with us? What kind of people stand at a window and watch a woman die? The answer that came back from science was not what anyone expected, and it changed everything we thought we knew about human nature. Two psychologists named John Darley and Latané read that newspaper story and had a different reaction than most people. They were not horrified in the way the public was horrified. They were curious, because what the public saw as a moral failure, they saw as a puzzle. Why would 38 people all independently make the same choice? That does not look like 38 individual failures. That looks like a system. They designed an experiment. A participant would sit in a room and communicate with other people through an intercom. They were told it was a study on the personal problems of college students. At some point during the conversation, one of the voices on the intercom would begin to have what sounded like a seizure, choking, asking for help, then silence. The variable was simple. Some participants believed they were the only other person on the call. Others believed there were additional people also listening. When participants thought they were alone, 85% of them left the room to get help within the first minute. When they thought there were 4 other people also on the call, that number dropped to 31%. Same emergency, same person in distress. The only thing that changed was how many people the participant believed were also witnessing it. Darley and Latané called it diffusion of responsibility. The more people present, the less any single person feels that the responsibility to act belongs to them. It is not that people become cruel in a crowd. It is that the weight of obligation gets divided by the number of witnesses until each individual share feels too small to act on. They also identified a second mechanism that made everything worse. They called it pluralistic ignorance. In an ambiguous situation, people look to those around them to figure out how to respond. If no one else is reacting, most individuals conclude that there must not be an emergency, not because they are certain, but because the absence of reaction from others feels like evidence. Everyone is looking at everyone else and reading calm. No one is actually calm. Everyone is performing calm for the people around them, and in doing so, they are confirming everyone else's inaction. 38 people looked out their windows and saw that no one else was doing anything, and each of them interpreted that as a sign that maybe it was not as bad as it sounded, or that someone else was already handling it, or that getting involved would be overreacting, and so none of them moved. The science was correct, but the original story was not. Decades later, investigative journalists and criminologists went back to the case. They pulled the original police files. They tracked down the surviving witnesses. And what they found was that the New York Times story, the one that shocked the world, had been significantly exaggerated. The number 38 was never verified. It came from Police Commissioner Michael Murphy, who told the Times a figure that investigators later said had no clear basis.
The idea that witnesses stood at windows for 35 minutes watching a prolonged attack was not supported by the evidence. The attack happened in stages across different locations. Most witnesses heard screaming but could not see what was happening. At least one person did call the police. The response was delayed. Others shouted from windows, which may have caused Mosley to flee twice before returning. This does not change what happened to Kitty Genovese. She was murdered. She suffered. She died alone. That is real.
But it changes the lesson. The version that terrified America, the image of 38 people watching passively and choosing to do nothing, was not quite the truth. And yet, the bystander effect it inspired is completely real. Darley and Latané ran their experiments. The results held up. The effect has been replicated dozens of times across different countries, different cultures, different emergencies. The diffusion of responsibility is not a myth. The psychology is solid. What is strange is that a largely fabricated account of an event accidentally revealed a real and verifiable truth about human behavior. The story was wrong. The phenomenon it pointed to was right. So where does that leave you? Because this is not an abstraction. You have been in this situation. Maybe not a violent crime on a dark street, but the version of it that shows up in ordinary life. The meeting where someone says something wrong and everyone looks at their hands. The comment online that everyone reads and no one responds to. The person visibly struggling in a public space while everyone keeps walking. The moment where you thought someone else would handle it and someone else thought the same thing and no one did. The research gives you one specific and practical piece of information that changes the math entirely. Bystander paralysis almost completely disappears when one person acts first. When someone in the crowd breaks from the pattern, the spell breaks for everyone else. The diffusion of responsibility reverses. The pluralistic ignorance collapses because now there is actual evidence of how to respond, and people follow it almost immediately. The lock only holds when everyone is waiting for someone else to turn the key. In Darley and Latané's experiments, if a single person started moving toward the emergency, others almost always followed within seconds. The hesitation was not about indifference, it was about uncertainty, and one person acting is enough to resolve the uncertainty for every single person in the room. This is what the story of Kitty Genovese actually teaches. Not that people are secretly selfish or cowardly under pressure, but that groups are extraordinarily sensitive to the first signal they receive. Be the first signal. Not because it makes you a hero, because the person in front of you is a real person, and the only thing standing between them and nothing is a system that is waiting for someone to go first. You know how the system works now. That changes what you owe it.